Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Ask Dr. Kurt podcast. And today we have an exciting topic, a topic that might be afflicting many of you out there listening and watching this, acid reflux. Today we're going to talk about how do you fix it, how do you get it, or essentially get rid of it for good, not just block some of the acid. So traditional medicine tends to take a weird approach to acid reflux. So we have to look at this when you take acid blockers, what is happening to the stomach? So traditionally, when people have acid reflux, there's a lot of different symptoms you can feel. You can feel burning in your throat. That's most common. You can get a raspy voice a lot. If you wake up with a raspy voice and a lot of mucus, odds are you have some acid reflux symptoms. Feeling uncomfortable, really, really bloated, burping all the time. So when your stomach doesn't quite work right, that means you minimally have stomach dysfunction, let alone, and then acid reflux, which is essentially acid going into your throat. So what has happened? How does your general practitioner treat this? Well, he says, take some acid blockers. Well, what is that doing? Well, it's making your stomach acid, which is supposed to be acidic, alkaline or neutral. It's basically neutralizing the acid in your stomach so that when the acid splashes up into your esophagus, it doesn't burn your esophagus, because your esophagus is different tissue than your stomach. Your stomach is designed to be very, very acidic. I think around 0.8 to 1 on the pH scale, which is highly, highly acidic. That'll burn most tissues in the body. But the stomach is designed for that, and it's designed for that because it needs to break down foods and initiate digestion. So think, when that acid splashes and gets up into your throat, your esophagus is not made to handle that type of acid. So why is the acid from the stomach getting into the esophagus? Well, there's a muscle, and it's called the lower esophageal sphincter that closes off your esophagus from your stomach. So as that esophagus goes down and pierces through the diaphragm, there's a little muscle there that opens and shuts. And guess what that muscle responds to? Guess what makes it close? Acid. So the more acid in your stomach, the tighter that little muscle squeezes. And I use the word muscle because muscles can be trained. So remember that theme as we go through the steps to correct and get rid of stomach acid. I have 4 main steps, and it does take some time to begin to get rid of, because step 1 is healing the stomach. So we need to get rid of infections, of which the stomach can really only have one. It's called H. pylori. It's a normal bacteria. Everyone has it. But when your stomach starts to not function properly, that environment of the stomach changes. H. pylori has the ability to kind of thrive. It also is implicated in almost all ulcers and, call it open wound tissue injury in the stomach. So it's a normal bacteria, kind of like Candida is a normal yeast in your gut. But when things start to go awry, it can flourish. And in some people, this is a big deal. Other people's not quite as much. Or, it's a hard thing to kind of test for. But we have a special form of zinc called Zenlori. The brand I use is called Zenlori. But it's called zinc carnosine. And it's very effective at either killing off H. pylori or lowering that content. And it also helps heal the stomach lining. So that's usually, in almost all cases, our first step. And we have to heal the stomach before we can jump into phase 2, reacidification. So when we're healing the stomach, it's pretty easy. We just take this zinc supplement. I usually have people do that for at least 3 weeks, sometimes a bit longer. And in most cases, people start feeling better just from that. So that tells us people are nutrient deficient. People need specific nutrients to start getting their stomach to function properly so that we can not have any of those symptoms of acid blockers or acid reflux, which could be throat cancer, esophageal cancer, Barrett's esophagus, all the way to, I'll let you all Google side effects of acid blockers and daily antacids, and things like that. Google it. It'll kind of alarm you that the types of diseases, but I'll throw in a little hint. Those are deficiency diseases. A lot of the major side effects from acid reflux are due to not absorbing certain minerals like calcium or iron or B vitamins, B6, folic acid, B12, magnesium, all these different things, because the stomach is really, really important in digestion. The acid of the stomach is there to initiate the absorption of a lot of these minerals and vitamins, which is highly important. So we don't want to discount the role of the stomach. Next phase. So phase 1, we have to heal. And that's easy. Literally one supplement. And most people, it's one tiny little pill a day on an empty stomach. And we start getting the stomach environment ready for what we call phase 2, reacidification. And this phase, some people need for a long term, like years. Some people's stomachs just never quite create enough stomach acid to digest properly, which, it's one of those things where it's really easy to supplement, but also kind of annoying to always have to carry around some supplemental. So that's something we can discuss on a personal one-to-one basis to kind of figure out what's going to be your lifelong strategy if it ends up being, a long-term thing. And by long-term, I mean, a year or 2 years or longer. So reacidification, this is that muscle training part. Remember that lower esophageal sphincter is a muscle and it responds to acid. So instead of like your bicep at the gym responding to weightlifting, your lower esophageal sphincter responds to acid. So when you eat, your stomach stretches, and that's a signal to make more stomach acid, more hydrochloric acid. And then we need to get that acid to a low enough point that it squeezes that lower esophageal sphincter shut and closes off your stomach from your esophagus, hence no acid reflux. So that's our goal, is we look to titrate up betaine, HCl, literally hydrochloric acid, to a point where that muscle can clamp shut and no more acid reflux. So that one can vary a lot in people. I find usually 2 or 3 tabs, tends to work for most people most of the time. But we do have a full strategy of titration as well as a long-term, more supplemental strategy, which can vary per meal, per food, a lot of different things. But by the time we're at that, people are feeling a lot better. And this stage becomes much easier than it is, than it sounds like in just talking about it. And this is a big deal because step 2 is, we cannot begin with step 2 because step 1, we do have to heal and we have to make sure there's no open wounds like ulcers or just sensitivity in the stomach. So that's where phase 1, we really got to make sure we're not blocking acid anymore, which that, might be a discussion for you and your doc, or it might just be something we have to really kind of work on and get out of the phase of blocking acid, because step 2 of reacidification, we cannot be adding acid and blocking acid in the same story. It doesn't quite work out. So we do have to really focus on stage 1, which, I usually say a minimum of 3 weeks, if not a little bit longer. Sometimes that's the only stage we have to do, in rare cases, but we do have a mandatory stage 1, and then stage 2, which, does require the most vigilance, we could say, of reacidification of the stomach. And from there, I would say almost 90% of people are better 90% of the time. And what does that mean? Well, step 3 is figuring out what foods are causing issues. And by that, I mean food sensitivities. Some people call them food allergy. There's a lot of, heated debate on sensitivities versus allergies and all that thing. I use a specific company, Cyrex Labs. What I find is when we run food panels, the foods, if any of you have ever ran a Cyrex food panel, really easy to read. You got a green category, a yellow category, and a red category. We find people, if they avoid the foods in the red, we typically get rid of all food-related acid reflux. So a lot of the people that you have, I go out and I eat this meal and I always get acid reflux. Well, sometimes it's not as easy as knowing what meals you get acid reflux from. Sometimes it's a bit more insidious in some of those foods. We once had someone who was sensitive to peas. And I asked, because peas aren't a common food many people eat, a lot of, just casually eating peas. And I said, do you eat peas? And she said, sometimes 4 times a week. My husband loves peas. And peas were off the charts. We're talking like 4 or 5 times the high level in the red category. And she stopped eating peas, and I haven't spoken to her in a few years, but it seemed to have a huge impact. And we've had other cases where people start cutting out, very specific foods they're sensitive to, and all of a sudden the acid reflux starts to diminish and just kind of float away. So in a lot of people, we call it that 10% of the 10%, food allergy, the food panels become really, really important. And I will tell you that, the main foods do tend to be, dairy and gluten are really, really common foods. Those are just kind of inflammatory. They're kind of linked to most autoimmune conditions. So that's a good rule of thumb to get, to kind of avoid. And then a lot of times in people that kind of have this chronic, even after, phase 1 and phase 2, they kind of still get these days and times. Avoiding the right foods in their, in their sensitive categories ends up being a huge, huge player. Long-term wise, it helps them not have to use the betaine HCl quite as often. So in the short term, some people it's really necessary to get rid of stomach acid. I would say long-term in almost everyone, it's a big part of not having the acid reflux come back, and hence not having to do all the supplementation all the time. Because I will tell you, as a person who this subject's near and dear to my heart, I suffered from acid reflux and have been doing this type of stuff for a long, long time. Not having to carry around betaine HCl when you eat is a nice thing not to have to do. In the short term, when you're healing the stomach and going through it, it's really not that hard because you feel so much better. But you don't want to have a pocket of supplements everywhere you go for the rest of your life. That's not a viable solution. That's almost the same solution as standard medicine is carrying around, acid blockers and calcium carbonate pills in your pocket all the time as well. So I will say that's the big reason food panel ends up being really important, is it just kind of eliminates the need for the extra supplementation for most people, going through. So now we have our these would be our nutritional phases. We got our healing of the stomach, which we do with a special form of zinc. We got our reacidification, which we do with betaine HCl. And we have our food panel, food allergy testing, food sensitivity testing, where we look to avoid the foods that we know are causing inflammation and immune reactions. All right, phase 4. This is our chiropractic, or sometimes use the word structural component of getting rid of acid reflux, because you got to think the stomach is an organ, and it's there. And I took some notes on this because we do have quite a, kind of a few pieces. And I will tell you, in some cases, the structural piece is the number one portion. And in some people, it's a necessary portion. And some people, it's very, very minimal. So when I say all that, we got these 4 main steps. Well, we run through all of the steps in every person that is an acid reflux case. We just have to say most people have 1 or 2 categories that are pivotal that they have to do in order to get rid of acid reflux long term. And some people, it's kind of just an easy flow through all of them. But I will tell you, we do check it in every single person, and there always is at least something from every category. Sometimes it's really a really easy fix. So when it comes to structurally looking at acid reflux, we first look at the stomach. Where is it situated properly? And for some of you out there, I am an applied kinesiologist. So that means we use neurologic muscle testing to kind of test different things. And in the body, every muscle has an organ association with it. So the pec major is a really easy test. It's associated with the stomach. So we use that muscle to kind of test for, the stability of the diaphragm in the stomach. So first we test it, what we call in the clear, to see if the muscle's strong. And in almost every single case, there is some stomach, call it congestion, all the way to a hiatal hernia would be the clinical term for when the stomach is kind of stuck and herniated up through the hole where the esophagus comes through the diaphragm. So a lot of times we have to kind of decongest the stomach and get it, sliding smooth with the diaphragm, whether that's a complete hiatal hernia type adjustment, or if it's just kind of decongesting the stomach from the diaphragm. We're not quite sure. We don't image it and see, so we don't need to be technical in the exact diagnosis of it. We can test for it neurologically, and we see it, and then we correct it. And I will say a lot of people with acid reflux have very stiff diaphragms, meaning around where they breathe, the diaphragm area is really stiff. You can't push there's no motion in the ribs. There's no motion in the diaphragm. They're unable to breathe and really use the diaphragm as a way of breathing. So that's a big phase as well. It brings us to the diaphragm. We have to loosen up the diaphragm. We really have to promote breathing. We got to get the rib cage moving, which is, call it, a lot of standard chiropractic care, a lot of mobility work, some fascia work. We have a whole diaphragm plan, which maybe we'll go through in another podcast video where we'll kind of dive in and show what we're doing for that. But we got to get the diaphragm moving, whether that's with breathing exercises, some mobility routines, some fascia work, some rib work. Generally, that's pretty standard chiropractic stuff. Most chiropractors definitely know how to get the ribs more mobile. And the next part is, it's an old saying for us chiropractors, look at C345, keep the diaphragm alive. So we do have to look at the neck, make sure the middle neck is functioning and free of any adhesions and restrictions, and make sure the range of motion's there. Pretty standard chiropractic stuff. And the last thing we got is cranial work, because, the vagus nerve does come from the brain, and there's a specific cranial malformation that is associated with stomach problems, and it's called the temporal bulge. So we do very typically find the skull is a little, what does that mean, temporal bulge? It means one side of the temple is kind of bulged out a little bit, and then the other side, we call it parietal descent. And so the skull literally shifts a little bit, and we have to kind of rework the skull back in place to take pressure, off of the brain, off of the cranial nerves. And that one specifically links in and is almost present in all cases of acid reflux and stomach dysfunction. So it's kind of a combo of all of those things. We got to make sure the stomach is reset, which a lot of times we'll send people home with their own stomach homework to reset their stomachs every time they eat. We got to get a loose and flexible diaphragm, which is probably the hardest part of this, is starting to breathe. Because what do people do when they're stressed? Lock in place, don't breathe, or breathe very shallow and really kind of flex the body down and curl forward, which if any of you can try right now at home, your diaphragm's not moving when you're in that position. So stiff diaphragm is usually the hardest part of this. And then we got some neck work, which as a chiropractor, really easy. And then some cranial work, which some chiropractors know and have studied cranial work, and that'll be an easy thing too. To work with. But think in structure, we could say we almost have 4 subcategories of structural pieces that all play a role in fixing acid reflux. And when we look at this, we have to address all of them at once. Only addressing one part will generally only get you so far. So what I try to be here is as comprehensive as possible to kind of give people the hope and the strategies to really knock this out, because this is complex. And we're talking, what's the time frame of this? Well, structural part, depending on, some people have a lot more, if you have chronic neck pain or chronic sinus infections and, kind of skull related issues, that can take a while. And what I mean by a while, a few months of pretty consistent care to kind of knock some of that stuff out. Breathing and rib mobility, that diaphragm mobility, tends to be the hardest, because that's a lifestyle and stress pattern that we really need to break through. All right. So to kind of summarize our 4 steps to really knock out and kind of put acid reflux in the past is: step 1, we got to heal the stomach. Step 2, we got to reacidify the stomach and train that lower esophageal sphincter. Step 3, we got to get the foods we're sensitive to out of the equation. We got to test for it. There's no real way, elimination diets, they can not work for, some people to really feel digestive problems, but we do know now we don't feel autoimmune sensitivities only in the digestive tract. You can have skin issues, brain issues, which is really alarming that foods can impact the brain and we don't really know. We're not feeling those traditional digestive symptoms. So I always tell everyone, if this is a real, acid reflux case, we do want to run a food panel, just so we can get a little bit more, hard data on it. And it's easy as avoiding the foods in the red. And then we got our 4th category, our structural chiropractic piece, which we have 4 subcategories of that. Is we got to look at the neck, got to look at the skull, got to look at the stomach, and we have to look at the diaphragm and rib mobility. Now, kind of our bonus category, which I would say, we talked about the 10% of the 10% before. This would be the 1% of the 1%, call it, stress. Some people, we need to really affect stress and work on adrenal health, work on stress management, work on anxiety, because sometimes we have to think, there is that if we even think of stress in the classical sense of fight or flight or rest and digest, some people, their stress response is really powerful, and they're spending 100% of their time in fight or flight. So in some people, stress work, adrenal work, that, outside of healing the stomach and running through our acid reflux plan, that ends up being a harder part. But I will say most people, once we get through this main, acid reflux 4 steps, we knock most of it out of the park. And by then we know the adrenals and that fifth category, that stress category, is a big part of it, because that's impacting not just acid reflux, it's impacting a lot of other things in your life, whether it's joint pain, brain fog, usually, autoimmune conditions, thyroid things. We know sleep, it's impacting a lot of different things. So we're already working on that. And this kind of just adds another confirmation that we do need to fix stress and kind of get that working, because your stomach, at that point, we look at it as a bonus. It's giving you signal that you are too stressed when you start feeling those symptoms. So if anyone really wants to dive a little deeper, has any questions, or, essentially wants to jump on some sort of plan, give us a call. I have my business. I'll have all the links and everything, but this is really here for information. It's really here to give people, hope, people that there is something we can do to help with acid reflux. And if you know anyone, I'd love it if you'd send them over a link, because, we have a lot of people come in, and, people don't even report acid reflux as a main thing anymore. It's just lately in the past year, people that come in, it's just kind of, we learn about it casually through talking. You're like, oh, I've had acid reflux for years. I was basically thought it was permanent, and I'm just on acid blockers and, pills the rest of my life just to keep it at bay. No, we get rid of acid reflux. We help people manage it. We help people heal from it. So if you know someone, this is a real video just to help some people out there. All right. We'll see you next time.